Welcome to this Wood Solutions Campus presentation on forest certification. This presentation covers how forest certification works in the forest and its impact along the supply chain. Timber and wood products are recognised as renewable materials that can contribute to sustainable development. However, forestry practice can have a significant impact on the forest's renewability, its biodiversity, its soil and water quality, and on the communities that rely on the forest. So most environmental concerns about wood products generally focus on the quality of forestry practice, particularly the impacts of this practice on vulnerable forest ecosystems. Certification can assure customers that forests are managed to an agreed and acceptable standard. This is forest certification. It can also assure them that timber supplied to customers come from these acceptably managed forests along the supply chain. This is chain of custody certification. Two major certification schemes exist internationally and both offer forest and chain of custody certification services in Australia. One is the Program for Endorsement of Forest Certification, or PEFC scheme. This operates with its allied Australian Forestry Standard Certification, or AFS scheme. Timber and wood products certified under these schemes can display the PEFC or the AFS logos shown. The other major scheme is the Forest Stewardship Council, or FSC certification, which operates in Australia and internationally. Companies certified under FSC use the FSC logo. While the schemes have some operational differences, many forestry companies maintain both AFS and FSC forest certification.
Forest certification is about managing the area where those trees come from, and you're not managing it just for timber production, you're managing it for the biodiversity, you're managing it for the sustainable long-term durability of that forest area, and also those socio-economic values and the stakeholders that are involved in the process.
Forest certification aims to ensure that forests are legally harvested and sustainably managed. It is not a quality control process and has nothing to do with the quality of the logs produced. Forest certification is a forest management process with three key components. First, a company needs forest management procedures that cover sustainability issues and their legal requirements for harvesting logs. In Australia, this is almost always needed. To achieve forest certification, the company's forest management procedures have to go further than normal legal requirements and comply with a recognised external forest management standard. That external standard is the second major component. The third key component is third-party audit of the company's procedures and actions against the requirements of the external standard by an independent certification body. For AFS certification, the applicable forest standard is AS 4708, and JASANS accredits the independent certification bodies. For FSC, interim standards arrangements are in place, while an Australian FSC standard for forests is being developed. FSC also accredits independent certification bodies.
Well, the first thing is they actually have to comply with the Australian standard. So they would set up their own internal processes to meet that standard. Then they would contract an independent certification body. The certification bodies in Australia are accredited by JASANS. JASANS is the Joint Accreditation System of Australia and New Zealand, a body established by the federal government to police and manage the certification industry. So the certification body is accredited, which means that they are independent, they are impartial, and they are technically competent. Then the certification body will come and do the audits, and they will audit each operation which that company undertakes in the forest and in their processing to ensure it complies with the standards. They will validate, for example, the sustainability indicators to make sure they're all being met. Particular focus on areas of high biodiversity, protected fauna and flora, again to make sure that they're managed in accordance with the standard. And then the independent certification body will make a decision on whether the standard is met or not, and that will go through a review process, and hopefully a certification decision is then made.
Right. So so that's for a forest organisation.
Yes.
What does a supplier who has to deal with the timber
that's coming from?
Absolutely. Again, in that case, they would have a chain of custody system.
Yep.
Again, similar process. There's an Australian standard for it. The Australian standard allows or gives rules and requirements on how you identify your certified product, how it shall be handled, restrictions on how it could be, for example, mixed with other products, requirements for the organisation to validate where it comes from, but they check that the suppliers actually do have a forest management certificate, the product is actually certified. It also includes, for example, even products which aren't certified. The organisation has to make sure that they're of a legal origin.
Yeah.
Particularly relevant for some imported products, for example, probably less so in Australia. So again, they will then contract an independent certification body who would audit them against the Australian standard and again make an independent assessment on whether they comply with that standard or not.
So with the two schemes, the FSC and AFS, there are groups called certification bodies. They will go out there and they will examine the records in detail of those organisations that are managing the forest, removing the timber and the chain of custody, and they look in great depth of what's going on to make sure that they meet the required standards of operation.
Okay, under the Australian Forestry scheme we have 27 million hectares of a certified forest.
Yep.
Much of that is genuine production forest. Some of it is also reserves, which are set aside, but again, they're still managed not for wood production, but for other reasons. So they still maintain the certification. As far as production forest goes, it's probably about 95%. Many of the larger companies, especially those which are export focused, will have both the Australian Forestry Standard and the Forest Stewardship Council.
Companies with forest certification have the right to stamp their products with the scheme's logo and their certification code. They also have the right to pass use of the logo along the supply chain to companies that use their products if those companies have chain of custody certification. The certification code is important and allows the status of the company's certification to be confirmed on the scheme's website. Forest certification is not the same as having certified forest products. Forest certification is only the first step in the supply chain. Generally, forest certification only covers the delivery of logs from certified forests to the company that will process the logs. If a customer wants to be certain that the products that they use come from certified forests, then the forest managers need forest certification, and every company along the supply chain who processes the logs and products from the logs needs to have chain of custody certification. This chain of custody has to be unbroken, and certification has to be for the one scheme along the supply chain. FSC chain of custody certification does not apply to logs from PFC forests. Equally, PFC chain of custody certification does not apply to logs from FSC certified forests. In summary, most environmental concerns about wood products focus on the quality of forest practice. Certification can assure customers that forests are managed to an agreed standard and products supplied to customers come from these forests. Two forest certification schemes operate in Australia: Australian Forestry Standard or AFS and Forest Stewardship Council FSC certification. Each has its own forestry standard. Both schemes are credible and are well supported on the ground. Forest certification aims to ensure that forests are legally harvested and sustainably managed. Certification is a rigorous process requiring third-party audit of the company's practice against an external standard. Companies with forest certification have the right to stamp their products with the scheme's logo and their certification code. Forest certification is not the same as having certified forest products, and chain of custody certification is required for processes along the supply chain.